starting at a random place in a bunch of notes that I may or may not have turned into a video. Let's see if I can actually make a video. I'm celebrating not being in a lot of pain because the Tylenol kicked in. So here we go. The federal term in federal law, or the term used in federal law to describe an antique firearm, can mean all of these required to be true, or any of them, depending on who you ask. So let's explore this. Any firearm, including matchlock, flintlock, percussion cap, or similar type ignition system. Matchlock means you literally lit it with a lit piece of burning material, cannon. Flintlock, literally a piece of flint hitting a piece of steel, making sparks, scraping off a little bit of iron off that steel piece. Percussion cap. This is very similar to what's currently used in normal ammunition, but these are all separate parts. Manufactured before 1898. This is the year after which centerfire ammunition became readily available and more commonly used in conventional arms. Any replica of a similar firearm, only if the replica is not designed or redesigned after the fact to use anything other than those methods, meaning rimfire or conventional centerfire fixed ammunition. Now there's also a caveat here. If the ammunition is no longer available and it was centerfire or rimfire at the time, because some of it was, it's just not, that would also be okay if it's not available, readily available through ordinary channels of commercial trade. If you sit there and reload your 22 caliber Velodog pistol ammunition, because I think that's really cool to have centerfire 22 caliber, real, literally 22 Magnum bullets, they're just black powder only, and let's say you redesigned and built your own gun, I can do that, and make a 22 caliber centerfire pistol. It's just a street legal pistol, it's a rifled barrel and everything, and just happen to use centerfire instead of rimfire 22. I mean, you can make these, you'd have to sit there with a lathe, and if you just reloaded them all the time, you'd have a perfectly serviceable and very sustainable pistol. And you could make it a literal 22 Magnum. In fact, there's some oddball ones that are even more powerful than real 22 Magnums. But you can't just go buy disposable ammunition for it. That would be acceptable, and it would be considered an antique firearm, even though you're making your own ammunition. But this is mostly for older weapons and that sort of thing. Now, this also includes things that used to be in common usage that would be considered dangerous items or whatever, that would never be practical these days for anything because they were never designed to be fired by a human. This includes literally signal and boat cannons, noise cannons, oversized flare guns that are designed to fire something a little bit more heavy duty than what you might think a shotgun could take, and even giant shotguns. This includes the extremely big bore things that used black powder, because a larger bore made it to where you could get away with using black powder and get something done with it. For instance, 1 and 2 inch diameter literal cannons that were used for commercial hunting and that sort of thing. And that also means that also, if you're not aware of it, one of the reasons you can get a big bore flare gun and not have any restrictions and it can be metal is that nobody at the time, even then, would have put in a black powder based shotgun shell into a 1 inch bore 105 caliber 4-gauge shotgun pistol. That would be dumb, but people had done it. That's the upper limit for one arm fireable gun that existed at the time with black powder, and if you did smokeless powder equivalent, it would still be at the upper limit. That's very, very close to the point that you would actually be causing yourself sustained real damage to the ligature in your hands. People fired them once a year for celebratory purposes or wore thick gloves, that kind of thing. But it's not a practical weapon, for instance. And it doesn't have any real ammunition for it. You could take the flare cartridges and repurpose them, but you're then taking your life in your own hands. And the ones you find are not designed to do that. And if you got a real shotgun for that, it's an 8-foot-long blunderbuss thing that you basically have to strap to a real boat. It's a cannon. But anyway, if you build a replica, no problem. And of course, if you build a replica for steampunk purposes that made out of plastic, it's perfectly acceptable as well. Now, next one. Any muzzle-loading rifle, this is a separate category. Muzzle-loading shotgun or muzzle-loading pistol, just say muzzle-loader. It doesn't say that it has to be black powder yet, which is designed to use black powder or black powder substitute, or in which cannot use fixed ammunition. Now, the ruling does also allow for black powder substitutes that are not black powder, because they're not anything related to it, and you can get smokeless powder versions that are acceptable as well. The government kind of allows that. That means you could literally use, if you know the dram equivalent or whatever the heck it is, you could use a muzzleloader with conventional propellant and get as much performance as you need, but it has to be physically muzzle-loaded. Everything has to go from the barrel in, except, and this is an exception, revolving pistols have a chamber set where you fill the chamber just like you would a muzzleloader, and you have a back end where you put in your primer. You're allowed to use cap and ball and primer and that sort of thing. For the purposes of this, the term antique firearm shall not include any weapon which incorporates a firearm frame or receiver which is converted into a muzzle-loading weapon, or any muzzle-loading weapon which can be readily converted to fire-fixed ammunition. If it can go back and forth, it's not considered an antique by replacing the barrel, bolt, breech block, or any combination thereof. So it would have to be itself treated as a modern weapon, but if you build it as a muzzleloader only, you're fine, or one of the other combinations. Now, what this just means is that, legally speaking, if you make a pistol, if I took my flare gun and made it to where it's breech loading for only the primer, to where it only goes up to where you can put a primer in, and just make the whole thing literally just a big shotgun shell stuck on a frame with a trigger, that would be acceptable as being this, but I'd have to make it to where I couldn't convert it back and forth. But only for one reason, so that it wouldn't be declared a real current model pistol. If I wanted to be able to go back and forth, the barrel would have to be the part that has all the unrestricted components that you would have for a muzzleloader. If I make it to where I can convert it back and put a normal barrel on, it has to be 50 caliber or below. That's why a lot of muzzleloaders are 50 caliber. You can go back and forth if it's technically possible to do it. So to avoid legal restrictions, they're limited to 40 and 50 caliber by choice, so that you never have a problem with it. At 50 caliber or below is acceptable for almost anything. And if you use rifled barrels everywhere, even in a shotgun, it can't legally be declared anything, as long as you configure it either just as a pistol or as a rifle or shotgun. But that's one of the reasons you find out 50 caliber muzzleloaders are used that way. And that's actually more than adequate for most shooters. They don't really need more than that. And again, if it's a shotgun, you just build it long barrel and never have it go back. And yes, you can put adapters into a normal shotgun and make it into a virtual muzzleloader, but it starts off life and has the same legal standing as a normal modern weapon, as long as it doesn't violate any of these rules. If you want to make something like a short barrel shotgun 12 gauge pistol because you hate yourself, you have to build it as a muzzleloader, that's all. And it cannot have the ability to change back and forth, including being a break barrel, which would be easy to change out. You have to make some unique system or use some antiquated system. Next, private sales that occur outside of gun show loophole law. A private party is required to request a criminal background check in Oregon. The statute on antique firearms are not firearms for gun dealers, so they don't have to. There was a weird loophole that was created by Oregon law trying to close this loophole at gun shows that made it to where private sales are more regulated than actual businesses that are required to keep the records. Ordinary people just selling a random curio can get into trouble. It's just marking down the paperwork. You have to fill out a form. So you have to go through a federal firearms licensed gun dealer in the area. Just thought that was kind of funny. Oregon law and federal law. U.S. federal definition of a firearm excludes antique firearms, and they include a third category of non-firearm exclusively that may not be covered by state law. Guess where this goes? Oregon law exempts antique firearms from many Oregon laws regulating the transfer, possession, etc. of firearms, and defines antique firearm as a firearm including any firearm with a matchlock, flintlock, you already heard all that. Any replica, same thing, not designed or redesigned to fire rimfire ammunition, or anything else that's not readily available. If it's antiquated, it's fine. But they didn't include the muzzleloader rule, because in the state of Oregon, at least as far as that goes, their idea of an antique firearm is just that it's antiquated. If you can make it to where it can go back and forth between the frame being a muzzleloader and a conventional arm, you can get away with it. But that's only regulating if you make the muzzleloader not have the same compliance rules. If you make a 12 gauge pistol, it has to have a 26-inch barrel. If you make it 50 caliber or lower, you don't have any real restrictions. But if it's pistol size, it now has to be rifled. The state of Oregon doesn't have that. Federal law does because, unfortunately, something very simple happened. A bunch of people figured out how to make universal frames at one point, and they decided to say, if you're going to make it go back and forth, have it start off being a street-legal, regulated pistol grip shotgun or pistol or rifle or whatever, and you can go ahead and put a muzzleloader barrel on it, but the device itself has to be treated as a real gun, which means if you're in an area that regulates the gun and the federal government wants you to make a list of it as being a real firearm, you have to do that. That also means a felon can't do this by just grabbing a frame from a revolver and welding a bar on it and making it a muzzleloader. They have to actually buy a real muzzleloader that's limited just to muzzleloaders on a federal level. And that's actually where the federal antique firearm law versus the state of Oregon law changed. That extra thing for muzzle loading rifle, shotgun, or pistol was given a special category because of a very simple thing. Below 50 caliber, it's not really any different than any other firearm. Above 50 caliber, like let's say 81 caliber goddamn shotgun shells, you can get away with doing some crazy crap. So it has to never be able to be changed back and forth. And actually, if you have a break open action to be able to put the primer in, you want to have it break back. You want to have to pull the hammer back or slide the frame out of the way, making it to where you can't just crack it open and put a different barrel in. It cannot be a quick change barrel. And breakdown systems became a problem federally. But they included that special subset because people were making muzzle loaders out of normal guns and back and forth. Me owning a flare gun on the wall, but having the ability to put a Schedule 40 hunk of 3/4 inch pipe in it so I can fire a shotgun shell is, quasi not really legal unless I make it 26 inches long. Then at that point, it's just a shotgun. If I want to put a pistol barrel in it, it has to be a rifle barrel. They're just sub-caliber adapters. That's seen as a loophole, but it does eliminate a lot of design work, and you can get away with just owning a bunch of barrels that have the chambers built in, and maybe a chamber on the other end. But when it comes to muzzle loaders, because of the over-the-top ease of which you can swap a barrel out on, let's say, a 12-gauge shotgun, they don't want short-barrel shotguns going on. That was really what it was about, among other things. And also, felons getting hold of muzzle loaders. There's nothing legally wrong with it in most ways. You're allowed to defend yourself. You just can't use something that can fire quickly. Having a double-barrel shotgun muzzle loader is acceptable. It doesn't have ammunition. You have to load it and leave it sitting there. Just don't put the primers in it if you're smart. Canadian prohibited firearms are any firearms listed by name. They just make a list of things that they don't want available. First layer. Second layer. Any fully automatic firing weapon. I'm going to use the right wording. Not auto-loading, auto-firing. Or that were converted to auto-loading but not auto-firing. And all versions of certain military weapons, usually named, but just in general, anything that was a military weapon, even semi-automatic rifles and shotguns that have been altered by sawing, cutting, or any other means so that the overall length is inferior to 26 inches, just like the United States. Barrel length under 18 inches for rifle or shotgun, and a handgun with a barrel less than 4.1 inches long or designed to discharge 25 or 32 caliber ammunition specifically, strangely, or dart or other object carrying electric current or substance. They don't want tasers unless they're regulated. You get an exemption just like the ATF gives an exemption for a 12-gauge plastic pistol to be a flare gun. You have to get exemptions, but basically pretty similar to our rules. But the rule on that is, anything that was a military item. They just don't want military-looking weapons out. Restricted firearms can only be discharged at shooting ranges. All handguns with a barrel over 4 inches, semi-automatic centerfire rifle, shotgun, or anything with a barrel length under 18.5, or they can be fired while under 26 overall by folding it up or whatever. The maximum magazine capacity is 10 for handguns and 5 for centerfire semi-auto rifles. Non-restricted firearms, 26 inches over long, 18-inch barrel, and is not a pistol in any way. Magazine capacity, no limit on manually operated pump or bolt action, shotgun, or semi-automatic rifles. To purchase or possess a gun, you need a license and you need to complete the Canadian Firearms Safety Course. Same restrictions as the city of Portland, Oregon. Basically, Portland, Oregon has, we have more rules and more rights, but basically Portland uses Canadian laws. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that.